Okay, so for the past couple of weeks, I've been trying to review Night in the Woods without actually reviewing Night in the Woods. The reason why I've been putting it off is that the game is aimed at a rather niche audience, and so much so that even though it's become one of my favorite games of all time, I wouldn't recommend it to most of my peers or just anyone watching this review. And on top of that, I was reading through information on the game, and there was one Steam review that summarized what was simultaneously good but also exclusive about this game. And the review read, "I needed to be depressed to fully appreciate this game," which I somewhat begrudgingly admit is true. I've avoided talking about this game because I know that depression and mental health is a particularly sensitive topic these days, and seeing as Night in the Woods centers a lot of its themes around just how depressing life can be, I tried my best to make this review about anything that wasn't, this game is an intricately written interactive picture book that has interesting commentaries on how terrible but neutral life can be and how we need to make the most of it. Without context, what does that even mean? Furthermore, games that have more than capable stories accompanied by gameplay usually have a plot synopsis that you can use to summarize the whole point of the game. So in BIOSHOCK Infinite, you play as a private investigator who has been commissioned to rescue a girl from a floating city run by a religious fanatic. In Bastion, you restore the world by returning magic shards to the Bastion. NITW doesn't have a real end goal, which makes it tough to explain. One of my largest complaints with the game is the lack of closure that it offers to multiple crucial plot points. It feels like 2/3 of a game that ends before the resolution starts rolling out fully, and yet this is still one of my favorite games. See, what Night in the Woods does so well is it perfectly captures a season of change in the main character's life. Through that character we're presented with a variety of themes and everyday struggles that she and other people face as a result of who they are or what their past has made them become. Since the story is mostly centered around this almost non-congruent slice of life episode that occurs over the span of a week, I'd compare the storytelling style to the likes of Napoleon Dynamite. So the main focus of Napoleon Dynamite was just Napoleon being himself and going through his life. The school dance and talent show was arguably the main point of the film, since it was what kind of completed Napoleon's vague character arc, if he had one, and yet at the same time we learned of other things that fleshed out other characters in the film. You had Pedro's push for presidency, you had Kip finally meeting his online girlfriend, and Uncle Rico being Uncle Rico. I find that Night in the Woods is incredibly similar to Napoleon Dynamite because while May's character arc more or less completes itself by the end of the game, there are a lot of details that you can pick up from other characters. The main plot that ties everything together in Night in the Woods is mostly secondary to what makes this game so interesting to play, or interact with as it were. Sure, it's a massive mystery that makes the small, innocent American town of Possum Springs severely more sinister, but even as significant as completing the interaction was, it wasn't what I remembered Night in the Woods by. And just like Napoleon Dynamite, most people tend to remember the film by its subplots and highly quotable script rather than how the movie ended. However, the comparison starts to fall apart in a few different ways that make Night in the Woods vastly more interesting than an early 2000s abstract comedy film. And for starters, the characters. Now we've all heard the phrase, "don't judge a book by its cover," and that holds especially true for pretty much every single character in this game. In my not so humble opinion, you can look at any character in Napoleon Dynamite and understand them pretty well. That, or you hear them speak their first few lines in the movie and they maintain that similar character for the rest of the movie. And here at NITW, I applied that same level of judgment. I thought I had everyone pretty much figured out from the get-go. So Beatrice was the edgy goth girl, Angus was the quiet computer nerd, Gregg was the rambunctious ringleader, and May was the mostly flawless main character whose only problem was that she couldn't handle the stress of college. It was because of this seemingly open and shut first interactions with these characters that I chose to spend the most time with Gregg, since he was the one that acted the most interested in May's return to Possum Springs. And also because he's a fox. Gregg initially showed off his tendency to be the fun-loving, lock-picking, car-smashing, mischievous character I expected him to be. To make things even better, his affinity for crimes revealed a lot about the main character May, who also freely partakes in whatever misdemeanor Gregg convinces her to get involved in. This relationship, combined with May's eagerness to participate regardless of consequences, reveals a lot about both characters. Despite wanting to appear and be treated like an adult, May is quick to return to the run of form that she had when she was a kid, causing mayhem and smashing things in with a baseball bat because she can. Gregg, on the other hand, is also equally excited to try and get things back to the way they were, showing off his hyperactive flamboyance as a result. And I'm going to spoil Gregg's story here a little bit, so if you really don't want to hear everything, skip to the timestamp here. Yet when we get to the end of Gregg's main interaction segment, we learn that due to his relationship with Angus, he feels convicted of his actions. On one hand, Gregg knows everything that there is to know about committing petty crimes in the most harmless way possible, yet on the other hand, that's kind of all he knows. At the end of the day, all he wants to be is the best possible fox for those closest to him. But due to his past, he's also thoroughly convinced that he's incapable of being good no matter what anyone else says. He truly believes himself to be nothing more than parking lot trash. And that's harsh. And it's definitely not the kind of dialogue that you'd expect from a character that looks and acts the way he does when you first meet him. I felt genuinely bad for the guy. I haven't gone back to interact with the other characters as of yet, but from what I've gathered, most of the rest of the characters, including German Lori, have some compelling dialogue. Writing has always been a facet in games that I've enjoyed, and while I don't want to make too many comparisons in this video, BIOSHOCK Infinite is an example of a game that I think does its story rather well, but lets its repetitive and often forgettable gameplay get in the way of that. I'd summarize Night in the Woods by saying that it's a game about dealing with failure and change, both of which are heavily showcased in the main character May Borowski. And I've taken this long getting around to the main character because I feel that instead of being the kind of stereotypical protagonist where everything revolves around her, everyone else feels like they're on even footing with her in terms of character development. Sure, the main subplot, which I will not spoil in any capacity, is based around her, but the writing in this game makes it feel like each of these characters had lives before, during, and after May's shameful return to her hometown. So, May is a 20-year-old college dropout who returns to her hometown Possum Springs in what was a desperate attempt to retain what sanity she had left. May wants to return to a state of normalcy, and as I've stated before with her return to petty crimes, she wants to relive her high school days and pretend like the world's all okay. As a surprise to no one, the world is definitely not okay, and May's world quickly comes crumbling down around her when she discovers that everything she remembered from her hometown just isn't the same anymore. In fact, a lot of it is significantly worse for wear. The old grocery store at the end of town is completely deserted, her favorite pasta diner closed down, Bee's mother passed away from cancer, one of her best friends is missing, there's mysterious goings on behind the scenes, and worst of all, she failed her parents by not completing her college degree. I know that that sounds rather utilitarian of me, like how dare you not complete your degree, you are now useless to society and a failure to your family. But May's parents make it clear that they poured just about everything that they had into making sure that she was on the road to modern day success. And it's not just her parents either. Even May's friend B says that she would have literally killed someone if it meant that she had a shot at getting into college. And yet here she was showing up home because college wasn't working out for her while expecting free handouts in return. Her friends are nice to her for the most part, but the townspeople all react with the same degree of disgust or forced politeness because she dropped out of college and came back home to be a freeloader, but at least she's not dead kind of deal. May starts the game off genuinely hating herself for her decisions, and she wants to pretend like everything is the way it was. She still is mentally a high schooler, so when she's called a child by her adult peers, she resents it. Yet when someone calls her an adult or a lady, she resents that as well. When May also begins to realize that not everything is as she remembers, she fights against the change, and I'm sure we all know how fighting against change goes. It goes pretty badly. By the end of the game, I feel that May has returned and learned to basically roll with the punches thrown her way. She spends most of the game hating herself, and it wasn't until about halfway through my playthrough that she said something positive, which I took as a sign of her realizing that she should cherish what friends, community, and opportunities she has left instead of being stuck in the past and bemoaning what she lost. In other words, learning from failure. The world may have gone to shit, but that doesn't mean that there's nothing left, and I think that that's a pretty powerful message for a game to have. Thankfully, the game isn't entirely doom and gloom, as there are some genuinely comedic lines hidden throughout that never seem out of place. What I mean by that is that I find a lot of movies, especially Marvel movies, will often see a scene as too serious. They'll have some character pull out a quick one-liner to diffuse the situations, whereas here, a lot of the humor is heavily based around sarcasm and general wittiness. In fact, the least funny part of the game is probably the comedy duo Garbo and Malloy because of how terribly forced that genre of comedy is compared to the writing in the rest of the game. I've already talked plenty about the characters I interacted with most during the game, but I think that it speaks volumes for the quality of writing when the jokes or intentionally comedic segments fit the characters that we've grown to understand over time. We can expect random hyperactive humor from Gregg because that's the character that he is. We can expect sarcastic ramblings from May because that's her character, and so forth. Night in the Woods is a character piece, and it feels more like a movie than a video game because of it. This is also coupled with the largest complaint that I see people raise with this game, where it doesn't feel like a game, because the gameplay is mostly run here, interact with this thing, exhaust all possible dialogue options repeated ad nauseum. There's a Guitar Hero-esque rhythm game involved in some minor interaction segments where you have to press WASD and C or spacebar at the right times, but that's really about it. About an hour or two into the game, you're met with these dream segments that require you to pull off some platforming while finding the 4 musicians on the 4 corners of the map. And it's not much, really, and it's for that reason that I can't recommend Night in the Woods as a game. In fact, it's for that reason that I approach this more like a movie rather than an actually fully fleshed out game experience, because Night in the Woods is more about its story, characters, soundtrack, and art style than it is about being an engaging game from a technical perspective. For that reason, I'd recommend this game experienced to someone whom I think would enjoy the story and the writing, which I think I understand to appeal to a very small percentage of my peers. Most people will think that May is irritating, for example, or that the parts of the story that have to do with mental health and economic hardships faced by the diminishing American middle class are far too ham-fisted for their liking. At that point, the people that dislike the story and the interactive cinematic experience that is Night in the Woods will try to salvage something from the gameplay, of which I've already stated there virtually is none. If you remember back to the beginning of the video, look at you, remembering things on screen from over 10 minutes ago. I mentioned that review said that I need to be depressed to enjoy this game. And I said that that was true. I'm not trying to be all, OMG, I'm 14 and this game is deep, because a lot of what does happen in this game doesn't take a higher or more mature mindset to understand. What I am saying is that as a person who also failed to continue attending university and basically dropped out at the age of 20 in a desperate attempt to save what remained of my own sanity, I empathize with May. I get it. I've decided to keep my criticisms for the end of this video for a couple of reasons. The main one being that if I start a review negatively, then everything else that I say afterwards sounds like a mediocre attempts at making the game sound good. Plus, I know that the average viewer retention on these videos ends about halfway through, so hopefully that people that got bored of my voice have at least a somewhat good impression of the game. Anyway, one of the weakest points of Night in the Woods is how everything surrounding its ending is handled. The game kind of comes to a point where all the subplots start to come together and approach the resolution, but their resolutions are never seen through fully. And I would have really liked to see that because of how invested I was in the characters by the end of it. It ends so abruptly that I initially thought I got a bad ending, as some of these games with branching storylines do. Like, I hung with Gregg the right amount of times, but didn't say the right thing in a few places, and that caused the game to end differently. But nope. The Wikipedia synopsis reads that it all ends the same way. One could argue that the movies? This is a game. Okay, never mind. One could argue that the game's ending is fine where it is because it's a snapshot of May's life rather than her biggest life achievement yet. If there was a real resolution to it, then I could see that being interpreted as this is all we have for May, which would be less satisfying in some ways. By cutting the game short, her life continues outside the game, whereas giving her a resolution here would have ended her arc more definitively. So am I willing to let it pass? Not really. I'm definitely more of a fan of games having their stories completed because it makes it seem like there was a whole point to the adventure. And a friend of mine who recommended this game to me said that he thought it would have been way more interesting if May was developed as or revealed to be a schizophrenic. It would have given so much more reason for erratic behavior and would have played into quite a few elements of the story, so well in fact that I'm surprised that that wasn't the angle or twist ending that the team at Infinite Fall tried for. One of the most patronizing parts of the game has to be the fact that some of the achievements for this game are tied to whom you choose to spend the most time with for its duration. You get separate achievements for completing the game with Gregg's story completed, or B's, or Angus's, or Lori's, or Germ's, but never all of them at once because, like in real life, you have to choose whom you hang out with at the end of the day. This means that in order to get 100% on this game, you have to play it at least 3 separate times, and that doesn't include getting other more skill-based achievements like playing the bass perfectly at each band practice, or hitting the forest god in the head with the crossbow. Since the game ends the same every time, no matter what, and since the main interactions that May has are all the same regardless of what you do on the side, the game quickly loses its replayability despite it requiring you to do so if you want that perfect 100%. As massive as I may have made those criticisms sound, they don't do a lot to detract from the game's story, which I reiterate is the main point of and the strongest point of the game. Aside from the very end, I think that everything else in the game leading up to it is a solid 10 out of 10, and the delivery from the characters is well deserved. Overall, I say that this game is best enjoyed as an interactive experience rather than something that's notable for how it plays in conjunction with its story. It's a narrative that talks about failure, acceptance, self-confidence, and mental health, and in the end, it's really just a charming game. The art style is enjoyable, even if the lack of shadows makes it hard to know what's in the foreground or what's in the background, and the soundtrack is nothing short of fantastic. If you're looking for something more laid back to play, pick this one up. It's $20 on Steam, and I think it's well worth a look. That's all I have for this one. Thank you all so much for watching. Social links are in the description below. Subscribe if you want more stuff like this, and I'll see you on the flip side. Goodbye.